Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller film named Death Whisperer. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story begins in a remote village in 1972 as dusk falls. A couple working in the fields discuss their daughter, Nat, who has fallen mysteriously ill. She can no longer walk properly and spends most of her time lying in bed. They decide to save up money to take her to a doctor. Suddenly, they hear Nat screaming from their house. Rushing back in panic, they find her crawling on the ground, crying out in pain. Before their eyes, her stomach swells like a balloon. She vomits blood, and soon after, she begins bleeding profusely from below. Within moments, Nat dies in agony. The scene then shifts to another family in the village. A mother reminds her 3 daughters to come home early after school, as their father plans to take them to the annual temple fair. From their conversation, we learn they have an older brother, Yak, who is in the army and expected to return in a day or two. On the way to school, the eldest sister, Yen, makes a deal with the youngest. If she can run to the school bus first, she'll get a cotton candy treat. The little girl excitedly dashes ahead, but when she reaches an old tree, she suddenly stops. The tree looks eerie and ominous. Yen asks if she saw something, but the youngest shakes her head and runs off without a word. That day, Yen is assigned to clean the classroom. As she sweeps, she notices a girl sitting at a desk. It's Nat's old seat. Shocked, she stares for a moment before realizing it's just her younger sister, Yard, who has found a stack of eerie drawings in Nat's desk. On the back of each paper is Nat's signature. By now, the whole village has heard of Nat's bizarre death, but no one knows what truly caused it. On their way home, the 3 sisters pass by the same old tree. This time, they all see a ghostly figure standing beneath it, a pale, female specter. They exchange uneasy glances but say nothing, choosing instead to briskly walk away. Suddenly, their older brother jumps out at them as a prank, scaring them half to death. Furious, Yen scolds him for nearly scaring them to death. That evening, the brother, who is home from university for the summer, helps the family harvest onions. By the time they return home, it is already dark. Their strict father, holding a cane, demands to know why they are so late. Yen quickly explains that she had cleaning duties at school and missed the earlier bus. Seeing his anger, the second brother suggests punishing them by making them water the fields, an excuse to let them go to the temple fair sooner. For the adults, the fair is a place to pray for safety and good fortune. For the children, it's all about fun and food. Yen buys cotton candy for the youngest, but suddenly Yard starts coughing. When Yen touches her forehead, she realizes she's burning with fever. She wants to tell their mother, but Yard stops her, insisting that if Mom finds out, she won't let her go. Yen sighs. She can't say no to her own sister. However, during the Ferris wheel ride, the youngest notices a deranged woman below, staring directly at them with an unsettling grin. Yard sees it too, and already feeling unwell, she grows even more uncomfortable. Unable to continue, they cut their night short and head home early. The next day, the second brother takes the feverish Yard to the clinic, but the doctor finds nothing wrong with her, prescribing only some supplements. As they prepare to leave, their eldest brother, Yak, suddenly squeezes into the bus. Overjoyed to see him back early, Yard smiles for the first time in days. That evening, the reunited family enjoys dinner together, but before they can finish, Yard complains of a headache and heads to bed. In the middle of the night, the window in her room swings open. Thinking it was just the wind, she gets up to close it, but as soon as she lies back down, the window opens again, by itself. Thinking it was a prank by her brothers, she pulls the curtain aside, but outside there's nothing, no one at all. Except there is something she cannot see. The next thing they know, Yard, who should have been fast asleep, silently opens her bedroom door and walks out. Yen, hearing movement, follows her to the kitchen, asking what she was doing up so late. But Yard doesn't answer. Instead, she continues to chew, her mouth moving unnaturally fast. Yen steps closer, peering into her hands. Yard is devouring something raw, something horrifying. Just as Yen turned off the radio, she glanced back and saw Yard already sitting up in bed saying she was hungry. Then, without another word, she lay back down and went to sleep. Yen found this strange and asked what she had just eaten. Why hadn't she heated it up first? But Yard didn't respond. Whether she was asleep or not was unclear, but she remained silent. Then, something even stranger happened. A bizarre sound echoed through the room, and Yen suddenly blacked out. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was already up. Outside, their father was arguing with the field supervisor. Seeing this, Yak pulled the supervisor aside. The supervisor insisted that once today's work was done, he had to leave. Yak pressed him for a reason, but the supervisor hesitated, reluctant to say more. He simply stated that he refused to stay. With that, he walked off, and the other workers followed. Luckily, with the three brothers at home, they quickly finished the remaining farm work. Since falling ill, Yard's personality had changed drastically. She seemed like a completely different person. Yen suggested she go outside and get some sun, as the weather was nice. But instead of agreeing, Yard snapped at the youngest, demanding a back massage. Seeing her attitude, Yen grew frustrated and the two argued. Their mother overheard the commotion and came to check, but before Yen could say anything, Yard spoke first, playing the victim. She tearfully insisted that her older sister was forcing her outside when she was sick and not feeling well. She even muttered that she should sneak out before her dad comes home. Yard had always been obedient, and now that she was sick, their mother believed her without question. Yen, unable to explain herself, had no choice but to take the youngest and leave the house. While they were talking, the youngest confided in Yen, saying that last night Yard hadn't slept at all. She had been staring at her the entire time, her face looking terrifying, almost like she was possessed. Remembering the unsettling events in the kitchen the night before, Yen decided to tell their mother everything. But their mother dismissed it, reasoning that Yard's illness could explain her strange behavior. That day, their parents had to go into town and wouldn't be back until the next day. Before leaving, they instructed Yen to take good care of her siblings. In truth, the three brothers had also noticed that Yard was acting increasingly unusual. Her condition fluctuated between good and bad, but even the doctors couldn't diagnose her with anything specific. Yak asked if they had encountered anything strange recently. Yen recalled hearing a woman's eerie voice in the middle of the night a few days ago, but she couldn't understand what it was saying. That night, Yard once again left her room. Yen was about to follow her, but the strange voice returned, sending chills down her spine to her smelly butt. She bit the inside of her hand, forcing herself to stay awake. This time, instead of chasing after her directly, she decided to wake her brothers for help. But when she entered their room, she found their beds empty. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the air. It was the youngest sister. Yen had no choice but to rush back. She found the youngest trembling in fear, refusing to let go of her. At that moment, Yak's voice called out from outside. Yen wanted to go to him, but the youngest wouldn't let her leave. In the end, she convinced her to hide inside the dark closet. When she reached the door, she saw her three brothers already outside. It turned out that they had sensed something was wrong and had gone looking for Yard earlier. The third brother told her to stay inside, insisting they would handle the situation. As they argued, Yen suddenly noticed a figure standing in the field. She pointed it out, and when the third brother followed her gaze, he was instantly terrified. A ghostly woman was staring at them, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Yak, unshaken, immediately pulled out a gun and fired. The woman vanished without traces of her smell. Meanwhile, the second brother had found Yard and rushed her inside. She woke up complaining of stomach pain but had no memory of what had just happened. Not wanting to scare her, no one said a word. The question remained, how had the three brothers realized Yard was missing? Earlier that evening, with their parents away, the brothers had decided to stay up drinking. The two younger ones quickly got drunk, leaving Yen awake and bored. That was when strange things began happening. The lights flickered, the radio crackled with distorted voices, and an eerie energy seemed to disrupt the air around him. As these supernatural disturbances intensified, Yard walked out of the house. At first, Yak thought to call out to her, but suddenly his legs went weak and his vision blurred. At the same time, he heard the mysterious woman's voice that Yen had described. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a kerosene lamp and burned his own hand. The sharp pain jolted him back to full consciousness. Wasting no time, he woke his two brothers, and they armed themselves before heading out to find her. They found Yard crouched in the field, clutching her stomach in pain, and that was when they saw the ghost. Yak didn't hesitate. He fired a shot, but it had no effect. The ghost simply disappeared with her bulletproof muscles. By now, even Yen knew what had happened. She asked the brothers if the ghost they saw had long hair, dressed in black as if attending a funeral. The answer was yes. Yen had seen the same ghost at their uncle's house. Putting together all the strange occurrences, they came to a chilling conclusion. Yard was now being haunted by the ghost. The next day, Yak decided to drive into town to find a spiritual priest. Before leaving, he suddenly brought up the case of Nat, the girl who had died mysteriously. He couldn't shake the feeling that what was happening to Yard was eerily similar to what had happened to Nat. As for the hauntings in their home, Yak instructed everyone to keep it a secret from their parents. He knew they wouldn't believe them anyway. It turned out that Yak had learned about Nat's death from a letter their mother had sent him. Something about the way she died had felt off, and it had left him uneasy. That was why he had taken leave from work to come back home. Yak gave Yen some pocket money to buy snacks for their younger sisters. She wanted to get some palm fruit for Yard, but Yard suggested they go out together for some fresh air. Just as Yen was asking their mother for permission, a woman climbed in through the window. It wasn't just any woman, it was the mad woman from the temple fair. Yard was terrified, but before she could scream in a chicken voice, the mad woman covered her chicken mouth with a fist. Yard was no match for her and was completely overpowered. The mad woman then pulled out one of Yard's teeth and swallowed it. Only then did Yard manage to let out a wail of pain. Hearing the scream, Yen and their mother rushed over immediately. Their mother recognized the mad woman, who was from the village. Seeing her daughter being attacked, their mother didn't hold back, giving the mad woman a fierce beating before throwing her out of the house. Not long after, Yak returned with a Taoist priest. By then, Yard was acting strangely again. When the priest asked what was wrong, she spat in his face and glared at him with wide eyes, warning him to stay away and mind his own business, or else she would tear his smelly part apart. The priest initially suspected that the mad woman's spirit had possessed Yard, but she denied it, saying that the mad woman wasn't capable of something this powerful. The mad woman practiced dark magic, but her misdeeds had eventually backfired on her, driving her insane. There were rumors that the mad woman herself had been possessed by an evil spirit. Out of fear of being cursed, the villagers had always kept their distance from her. Whenever something strange happened, she was the first person they suspected. The priest now believed that the evil spirit that had once possessed the mad woman was trying to transfer to Yard, though it hadn't fully succeeded yet. Up in the mountains, the mad woman was preparing a sinister ritual using Yard's tooth. A jar filled with foul-smelling flesh and blood sat before her, mixed with her own urine. Just as she was about to drop the tooth into the jar, Yak and the Taoist priest arrived. Without hesitation, Yak kicked over the jar, interrupting the ritual. The woman was too deranged to give them any clear answers, but what happened next was shocking. Right before their eyes, the mad woman slammed her mad head against a wooden post, ending her mad life instantly. The priest explained that the evil spirit had forced the mad woman to take her own life because it had found a better host, who is Yard. The priest warned them that the spirit would roam freely at night, but would return to its host by daylight. If it wanted to possess a new body, Yard's tooth was the key. Unfortunately, the priest admitted they were too late to stop the process completely. He instructed Yak to take good care of Yard and left to find another solution. That night, Yen and the youngest sister slept in Yak's room, while the three brothers took turns guarding Yard. Around midnight, eerie noises echoed through the house. This time, everyone heard them. Yak ordered his younger brothers to burn their hands with fire to stay awake, but they were a little too late. Both fell unconscious. Yak barely managed to stay alert, while Yen remained awake by biting into her own hand. Then Yard stepped out of her room, mumbling under her breath as she snuffed out the oil lamp. With a double attack from the spirit, Yak finally collapsed. Only Yen remained conscious. Seeing that none of her brothers could be woken up, she had no choice but to slap Yak awake. Once he came to, they managed to revive the other two as well. The brothers instructed Yen to stay in the house while they grabbed their weapons and went outside to search for Yard. Their parents, hearing the commotion, also rushed over. When their father learned that Yard had been possessed and had run off, he refused to believe their smelly bullshit. Just then, a chilling laugh echoed through the air. Enraged, Yak taunted the spirit, daring it to show itself. Their mother pleaded with Yak to stay calm and not provoke the entity, but their father remained skeptical, insisting that ghosts didn't exist and accusing his son of making things up. He even tried to take away Yak's gun. Furious, Yak argued back, which earned him a harsh slap from their father. Then, suddenly, stones began raining down from the rooftop. It was only then that their father's disbelief was shattered. Under Yak's command, the three brothers split up to search for Yard. Yak was searching the cornfield when he heard someone calling his name. The voice kept shifting positions, making it impossible to pinpoint. Even with a gun in his hand, he couldn't get a clear aim. After a moment of silence, he suddenly spotted a figure and instinctively pulled the trigger. But to his horror, he realized he had shot their mother instead. Devastated, he cried out that he had told her to stay at home. However, instead of responding normally, their mother let out an eerie laugh. Then, she slowly stood up, using her hands to realign her head, which had been knocked askew by the bullet. It was then that Yak realized the woman before him wasn't their mother at all. He turned and ran, with the headless ghost chasing close behind. The horrifying sight of the spirit pursuing him without a head was something he would never forget. As Yak ran out of the cornfield, he heard his mother's voice behind him again. Without hesitation, he fired his gun. Fortunately, the third brother arrived just in time, knocking the barrel off course. This time, it really was their mother. Meanwhile, a knock came from the back door of the house. It was Yard's voice begging Yen to let her in. The youngest sister, half asleep, reached out to open the door, but Yen quickly stopped her, telling her that's not her sister out there. The entity outside lost patience. A bloodied hand reached through the door crack and unlatched the bolt. Yen and the youngest huddled together in terror, too afraid to lift their heads. Minute by minute, time crawled by, but the expected danger never came. Then, urgent knocking rang out at the front door. When they opened it, it was truly their mother this time. The next day, the Taoist priest returned with an exorcist for reinforcement. Before entering the house, the priest walked around the property, observing the lush bamboo grove and the vegetable garden. Impatient to save his sister, Yak urged him to hurry inside. The priest, unbothered, told him not to be so anxious. He needed to learn patience, and brute force alone won't solve this. Before stepping into Yard's room, the priest drew a talisman on the door. Only the parents and Yak were allowed inside. Everyone else had to wait outside. The priest spoke gently, persuading the spirit to leave on its own. But words alone wouldn't work. Using Yard's body, the entity pitifully pleaded with their mother, begging her to come closer. The mother's heart ached for her child, and despite the warnings, she hesitated. Yak quickly stopped her and took control of Yard himself. The priest placed his hand on Yard's forehead. Instantly, her eyes turned bloodshot, and her body convulsed violently. The priest worked fast. The entity, knowing it couldn't win, tried its old trick, playing the victim to earn the mother's sympathy. It worked. Despite everyone's protests, the mother rushed forward, cradling her daughter protectively, and even demanding the priest leave. Now, under her mother's shelter, the entity smirked in triumph. The father, furious, stormed outside and returned with a willow branch ready to strike. But the entity wasn't afraid. When the father scolded Yard, she snapped back at him, fueling his rage. Losing control, he pushed his wife aside, grabbed his daughter and yanked her from the bed, only to slip and fall hard on the floor. During this exchange, the priest noticed something crucial. The entity was weaker in daylight. Although the exorcism hadn't fully succeeded, pressing on its forehead earlier had weakened it temporarily. To sever its connection completely, they needed to destroy its anchor. The priest turned to Yak, telling him to go to the backyard and chop down the bamboo. As long as it's here, the exorcism will be difficult. The father, who treasured the bamboo, would be furious, but Yak didn't hesitate. His sister's life came first. He began cutting, but sure enough, the father arrived, enraged. Before he could stop them, the priest asked him if he noticed a change in himself and his wife. This spirit thrived on manipulating emotions. Those who were unstable became easy prey. The father had always been strict, but under the spirit's influence, he had grown violent, even lashing out at his own family. The mother, normally kind, had become blindly protective, to the point of sabotaging the exorcism. The priest urged him to reflect. After a moment's thought, the father's anger faded. He gave his silent approval, and Yak and his two younger brothers resumed chopping. Suddenly, a foul stench filled the air. As expected, something was buried among the bamboo. The priest explained that this pile of rotting flesh is the entity's tool. It uses these organs to bind itself to its host. The bamboo masked the smell, which is why no one noticed anything was wrong. Burning the flesh should have been enough to end it. But the third brother, ever curious, decided to poke at it with a bamboo stick. The entity snapped. Possessing Yard, it charged at them, eyes burning with fury and warning to kill them all if they didn't stop. But it was too weak now. The brothers worked together to restrain Yard, pinning her down. Yak lit a fire and burned the decayed flesh. The priest pulled a hidden dagger from his cane and drove it into the ground. With that, the bond between the entity and its host was severed. The father and second brother stayed behind to look after the youngest sister, while the others took Yard to the hospital. On the way, Yak turned to the priest, asking why the entity chose Yard and if it was because she was weak. The priest said, "It's the opposite. Normally, spirits prefer weak bodies, but this one was cunning. It chose a strong, healthy host, someone exceptional. When Yard was just a few months old, she had nearly died of malaria. After recovering, she never got sick or injured again. The priest explained that hosts like her were rare, so when the entity found her, it abandoned the madwoman and latched onto her instead. It's worth noting that the entity hadn't truly left. As night fell, its power grew stronger. Just as everyone feared it might try to stop them from reaching the hospital, something strange happened. Everyone in the car, except for Yak, who was driving, suddenly vanished. Of course, this was just an illusion. In reality, they were still in the car, but they too were experiencing hallucinations. They saw the ghost of the deceased Nat standing in the middle of the road, and then, in the blink of an eye, she jumped onto the car. The priest quickly instructed Yen and her brother to shut their eyes. If they couldn't see the ghost couldn't see them. Meanwhile, Yak saw a group of ghostly women blocking the road. Without hesitation, he floored the gas pedal and sped straight through them. But then, he saw his entire family standing in the middle of the road ahead. Realizing it was another illusion, he didn't hesitate. He pulled out his gun and fired. The car barreled through the trees, and in an instant, everything returned to normal. However, a chilling, familiar noise echoed through the car. The pressure weighed heavily on Yak, but he managed to stay conscious. The priest attempted to make a move, but the ghost viciously bit off his finger. One by one, the passengers slipped into unconsciousness, leaving Yak alone to battle the entity. The struggle sent the car veering out of control until it crashed into a tree. The priest died on the spot. When Yak finally crawled out of the wreckage, he saw his unconscious family and even the priest being dragged outside by the ghost. His gun was gone too, now in the ghost's hands. Grinning menacingly, the ghost sneered, saying that at first it only wanted Yard's body, but their whole family just had to interfere. Now, it would have to kill them all. Just as it was about to attack, the priest suddenly regained consciousness, but before he could utter a single last word, a gunshot rang out. He was dead like a piece of shit. The ghost, now wielding the gun, was deciding who to kill next with only 3 bullets left. Yak panicked, urging the ghost to kill him and let his siblings go. At that moment, Yen woke up. As Yak rushed toward Yard, she tossed the priest's cane to him. Without missing a beat, he drew a knife and stabbed Yard's arm, not wanting to give the ghost an uninjured body. Surprisingly, the plan worked. Yard coughed up a mouthful of black blood, and the ghost was forcibly expelled from her body. Wasting no time, Yak took aim and fired, blasting the ghost's head apart. By dawn, Yard had regained consciousness in her hospital bed. She had no memory of the past few days. Thinking it was all over, Yen smiled and said from now on, he would take care of all the chores for her. But mid-sentence, Yard's expression suddenly changed. She reached into her mouth and pulled out a bloody tooth. Her body convulsed violently and then her stomach started to swell, just like when Nat had died. By the time the family rushed into the room, Yard was already vomiting blood uncontrollably. It wasn't long before she was gone. In the final scene, the grief-stricken family watched as Yard's body was cremated. After returning home, Yak grabbed an axe and went straight to the eerie old tree in the yard. Beneath it stood a wooden shrine used for offerings. Without hesitation, he hacked it to pieces, then set it ablaze. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.